Hi, everyone. It is now 10 a.m. and we have most of our attendees here, so we're going to get started. Thank you so much for tuning in and welcome to all the Matthaei Nichols members and friends of the organization to our Bonsai in Bloom virtual event. We have about 28 attendees in our audience today, so thank you so much again for tuning in, and we're happy to be able to accommodate all of you to learn more about the collection and share in our first virtual membership event. We're separate, but pretend that we're together this morning in the bonsai garden. You know who we are, but just for clarity's sake, we are the University of Michigan, Matthaei Botanical Gardens, and Nichols Arboretum. Again, we want to thank you for attending our member-exclusive and invite-only event, but we also want to thank you for your support, especially during the COVID crisis and our ongoing closures of the public garden space. We understand that these events might not take the place of being here with us, but we hope that it gives you that event feel for the hour you're tuned in with our garden this morning. This weekend in June was the pre-scheduled original event date for the Bonsai in Bloom, so we're happy to be able to keep on that schedule and show the trees in bloom as they would have been this weekend anyway. We did unfortunately have to cancel the live workshops and our guest artists, but our website will have that content on it to enjoy virtually this weekend and ongoing this month. Before we get started to showing you the trees and giving you Carmen and our guide, I want to give you some introductions for some other staff. So who is talking to you right now? I'm Christine, the volunteer coordinator at Matthaei Nichols, and I'll be behind the camera today as your narrator and moderator for the rest of this webinar. Our guide, who will shortly be on camera, is Carmen. She's our collection specialist, and she'll take you through this virtual event today. She joined Matthaei Nichols in 2009, working in our beautiful peony garden. Since then, she's worked with many of the collections and in many of the garden spaces here at Matthaei Botanical Gardens and Nichols Arboretum. Currently, though, she oversees the bonsai collection, which you'll get some insight into this morning. She has a Bachelor of Science in Horticulture from Michigan State University and has studied bonsai extensively under the instruction of Michael Hagedorn. We also have some support staff that's working remotely today. Joe, our marketing and development associate, he's behind the scenes at home, and he's going to be our Q&A moderator. So as you saw at the beginning, and you're seeing on your slide right now, we're going to interact with you throughout this webinar in the Q&A section. So please do ask us questions, and we'll definitely have time to answer them on camera. Again, some housekeeping that you see right there. You're muted and you don't have video on, but we really do encourage you to make this interactive and ask us some questions, and we'll provide as many answers as we can throughout the webinar. We are recording the webinar as well, so if we don't get to every question, we'll try and follow up with you via email later on. All right, well, let's get what you came for. I'll stop talking for a minute, and let's just all pretend that we're together, of course, with social distancing, as Carmen and I are doing this morning, in the bonsai garden on this beautiful June Saturday morning here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. All right, so here you go. You should be seeing Carmen and our trees. Hey everybody, welcome to our bonsai and penguin garden here at Matthaei Botanical Garden. I'm really excited to be here with you today. We've got almost all of our azaleas here on display. We'll walk you through. And I think, should we perhaps address the elephant in the room first, Christine? Yes, so it is called Bonsai in Bloom, but Carmen's going to mention what's going on with some of them this morning. Well, I'll show you this beautiful one right here. The year is 2020. Amid a global pandemic, a 500-year flooding event here in Michigan, and civil unrest like you haven't seen in decades, the azaleas have also decided not to bloom for us today. However, we do have some blooms, particularly here on this tree. We're going to zoom in for you right here. Are almost in bloom. They should be in bloom by the middle to end of next week, and we will be having additional content, walkthroughs, etc., to show everybody who's missing some of the bloom today what our trees look like in full bloom. So yeah, fantastic. So let's start with this beautiful one. And Carmen, I've learned a lot about bonsai from you lately. And what I'm looking at here is a lot of roots. So what's that all about? I mean, is this a style or what's going on with this beautiful tree? Yeah, so azaleas come, they're a really versatile tree to do bonsai with. In Japan, there's actually kind of two schools of azalea. There's folks who
just grow azaleas for bloom. And then there's folks who do bonsai with azaleas. And like I said, they're super versatile. You can do a number of different styles with each tree. This one in particular is exposed root. It's one of the more dramatic styles. You can see all of this here. It is trunk, but it's also root. So to achieve this, the tree is planted into a very deep pot up to about here. And then over many, many years, as the tree is repotted, the roots slowly become more and more exposed.
Awesome.
Until you get something like this. So these roots have turned into trunk, and then the actual roots that support the tree with water and nutrients are here in the pot. So these don't do anything but support the tree.
Fantastic. And I'm noticing here with our buds and our blooms right now, it looks like we've got a pink and a white one on the same tree. That's pretty interesting. Can they normally do that, or?
Yeah, so again, another really cool thing about azaleas, they are super easy to breed into different varieties. And within those varieties, you can get flower shapes, different flower colors, including, as is present on this tree, 2 different colored flowers on the same tree. And then as you're pruning your tree and developing it into a mature bonsai, you can kind of select which branches you're pruning off to bring more pink or more red or more white into the tree to kind of emphasize your design. I've seen trees that have an entire white top and then one pink branch in the middle and then white again on the bottom. So it can be really fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this is a beautiful one. Are there any others kind of behind you that we want to spotlight a little bit?
Yeah.
And again, audience, feel free to start putting some questions. We will stop at around 10:15 or so and try and answer a couple, but we want to show you some more trees this morning.
Yeah, we'll go over to this one. This is another really interesting style. This is called root over rock. I'll step into this so I can point out a few things. So this tree, the trunk was attached to a root. And again, this is very similar to exposed root where you have a rock and you lay out your roots over top of the rock, bury the entire thing, and again, over time, slowly begin to expose the roots. The roots will start to grasp the rock. And this is what you see some trees do in the mountains naturally. When they kind of cascade down a hill or cling to rocks, there's not much soil, they're not really deeply in the earth, they have to hold onto the rock. The roots then go under or into the ground and support the actual top of the tree that way. This one also has some blooms coming. This is also a pink and white one. And this is actually not the biggest tree we have, not the biggest azalea, but it is probably the heaviest. The rocks are quite dense, I would say.
Awesome. Great.
This guy over here has one bloom for you. Happy 2020. Here you get a single bloom. This is another pink and white tree.
Right now we're showing you the white bloom, obviously. You can see right there in the corner of your screen.
This style is more of a informal upright, and this is actually the trunk, the kind of back and forth trunk is what you'll see a lot of folks who just grow azalea for flower do. Just have that kind of squiggly trunk. Don't really focus on how the branches branch away from the trunk, just that those branches are completely full of flower. But here, again, with bonsai, and we have another informal upright behind you.
All right, we're going to pan right behind.
Upright. You can see very clearly defined pads, very clearly defined branches, and that's really what sets bonsai apart from other trees.
Beautiful.
And this one too, we've got some color on the flowers. We're almost there. One more day. And by this afternoon, we might have the flowers.
Exactly. And as we promised, our website will have lots of photos in the coming days as they do go to full bloom. You can check out our website for photos from last year. Many of you on this call were probably here last year. Myself and Carmen, of course, were here last year, and they are beautiful when they're in full bloom. So we promise we will get them to you somehow. All right, Carmen, we have another 5 or so minutes for another few trees to highlight.
This one is really a fun tree. This is a clump style. So this is where you have a massive base on a tree. multiple trunks going up, and then it branches off from that into different pads and clouds of flowers. Now, when this one's in full bloom, you can't really see any of this definition, which is one good thing about today. You can see the shape and the movement of the actual tree and where the branches are going. And again, that's another thing that makes azalea bonsai super versatile. You have flowers in the spring, super showy, but then the rest of the year you have just a beautiful green bonsai. They are semi-evergreens. They do lose some leaves in the fall, but maintain green leaves through the winter. And so really all year round, especially if you are able to get to them in your winter storage and see them, you really can enjoy them every month of the year.
That's fantastic. And Carmen, I know we kind of glossed over this, but we call this bonsai in bloom. So it's, we keep on saying azaleas, but what's kind of the more technical term of these trees?
Yeah, these are Satsuki azaleas. They are native to Japan. And Satsuki is, in Japan, it's the 5th month of the lunar calendar, which is typically when they bloom, May and June.
Perfect, yeah.
And if you'll remember from the intro, Christine said that when I started here, I was working in the community gardens, which are also native over in Asia, Japan, and China. And they too bloom this time of year and are often very fickle in bloom, just like the azaleas. So not new for me.
For sure. And a lot of us on the call, I'm sure, are nature lovers and have seen in our own garden this year. Yeah, nature's going to do what it wants to do when it wants to do it.
For sure.
So, all right. If we want to highlight one more tree, and then I see we do have about 3 questions in the Q&A. And once we highlight that next tree, we'll get to those questions.
I kind of glossed past this one, but I wanted to go ahead and talk about it a bit. This one, the trunk is really impressive. It's very thick, and these trees, they were donated to us from Dr. Melvin Goldstein, who is an alum of University of Michigan. He now works in Ohio at Case Western. These were imported from Japan. When they're grown in Japan, they're often field grown to get that really, really thick trunk. And then in order to import them, they have to be essentially stumped. So all the branches come off, they're completely bare rooted, power washed, inspected. And then if they are allowed in, if they have no soil on the roots, no pests, they come in. And so all of these branches have been regrown and restyled here in the US. And they're a relatively rapid tree to develop into bonsai. Usually within 5 years or so of a stumped tree, you can have something pretty good. Not necessarily showable, but likely close to that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And how many of the azaleas do we have in our collection? I know when Mel brings his trees, we really fill this place up, but how many do we have of our own?
We have, quick double check here.
Sure, yeah.
We have 7 of azaleas that have been donated to the collection. And yeah, typically we spend a whole day driving down to Mel's place, picking up additional azaleas to bring up here for this event, having them here for a week or 2 on display, and then driving them back home. So we saved a little time this year, just using our own instead of having a road trip.
Yeah.
But it's definitely super fun to drive down there and bring back full truckloads full of trees and blooms.
Yeah, they're definitely beautiful and fill this whole space up. So we're going to do a quick kind of final pan, and we'll have time to come back over here potentially at the end. And Joe, if you want to kind of queue up some questions, if you want to unmute yourself or video, however you want to do it this morning, we're ready for you.
Here I am. Hi, everybody. It's Joe Mooney. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We've already got some good questions. One just technical thing is that several viewers are saying they're having trouble hearing Carmen. So I'm not sure if it's a distance thing or, and so I've turned up the volume on my computer and that helps, but there was still a little bit of, it's still a little shaky. So there's that.
Okay, we apologize for that. We got some special equipment we were testing out this morning, but we'll try and get a little bit closer and still social distance. And
I'll talk louder.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, please. Yeah. Yeah, talk a little bit louder, Carmen. Thanks. So we've got some questions about age. One person wants to know, Valerie wants to know, how old is the oldest bonsai in the Matthaei collection? I'm not sure if Valerie means our bonsai in general or Satsuki. I guess we could just start with the trees on display. How old is the oldest Satsuki, and how long do they live in general?
So that's a great question, and something that we commonly get when we're talking about the bonsai in our collection. As for the azaleas, I don't know the full age of each tree. Like I said, they were field grown in Japan, and that can be anywhere from 5 to 30 years. The other thing too is it's not necessarily the age of the tree that's important, but how old the tree looks. So if you have a 5-year-old bonsai that looks like it's 100, that's generally more desirable than a 100-year-old tree that doesn't have any well-formed branches or a clear style. But I do believe the other thing about Bonsai Age is that it really depends where you're getting your stock from. So if you're buying from a nursery, you're more likely to know how old the tree is. Usually it'll be grown for 5 years or 10 years, and you have some of that information. For collected trees or Yamadori, those are collected from the wild, and those can be however old. They can be surprisingly small and still be 300 years old. So actually, I believe the oldest tree in our collection is back there against the wall. It's a Rocky Mountain juniper that was collected from the Rocky Mountains, and it's estimated to be between 800 and 1,000 years old. Now, it has not been a bonsai for that long, but the trunk itself has that amount of age to it, and most of the dead wood that you see, which is the area that's clear of bark that appears to be dead, that itself is natural from its time spent up in the mountains, withstanding the elements.
So I want to just pan over. I wanted to make sure you all had Carmen's voice for that answer, but I want to just pan over and make sure that we can see this tree really quickly before we get to the next question. So we'll just come over here because it's a very interesting tree, and since we are discussing it, I want to make sure that you at home can see some of that. So very, very beautiful.
Yep. So that wood there is dead. Most of it was created naturally in the mountains, but you can see that there is a live vein that runs all the way into the ground that connects the canopy with the roots, and you can see that live vein come up in the front. So we maintain that as living tissue, and then we have helped bleach the rest of it to show you the contrast between the living and the dead on the tree.
Fantastic. All right, Joe, I think we have time right now for 2 more questions or so, and then we want to make sure we have enough time for the demo, and we'll certainly have time at the end to answer a lot more of the questions I see coming in. So Joe, whenever you're ready for the next one.
Okay, where do they store them in the wintertime? Do they need to come inside? I mean, they're azaleas, and they're, azaleas are sort of hardy here. Where do you put them in the wintertime?
That's a really great question. And we've actually had to make some facility modifications in order to accommodate these trees. They are fairly winter hardy. Japan is a temperate location, and they do live outside there all year in Japan. Here in Michigan, we get cold, often at 0 or below 0. And it's more about the roots necessarily than the branches. The roots are, since they're in a pot, they're not insulated like they would be if they were in the ground. So we have to moderate the temperature a little bit more. So these, what we have done in the past is keep them in one of our glass greenhouses. But this year we received a grant and built a temporary cold storage. So over here in our Bonsai Studio, you can see the root structure. It's all open now, but 3 weeks ago it was completely enclosed. We made it into a makeshift greenhouse using translucent side panels. We put all the trees in there on benches. We ran heaters to keep the temperature just above freezing. And that allowed our trees to remain healthy while still getting their required cold period. Now, if you have an azalea and you're growing it at home, oftentimes you'll want to bring that into your garage or create a cold frame. There's a lot of options, and then again, professional growers will generally have a cold storage room to keep them above freezing but still cold.
Fantastic. Joe,
Okay.
we have time for one more question, and then we're definitely going to get to that awesome demo.
It seems like an easy question. Do I have to go to Japan to get a Satsuki? Can they be purchased somewhere in the United States?
They can be purchased here in the United States. We have a couple wonderful bonsai businessmen, artists, and just importers who go over to Japan regularly, usually every year, every 2 years, visit the azalea nurseries, purchase stock, and have it shipped over to them here. You can find these, the best ones, generally you find them at shows in the vendor area, but there are other bonsai nurseries that you can purchase them from. And they can be a little bit pricier, but do keep in mind that they did come all the way from Japan. I believe we have some folks here starting some stock, but generally, yes, they are imported.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Okay,
So we're going to head, yeah, thank you, Joe. We're going to head over to the studio now, but don't worry. Again, I see there's questions that haven't been answered. We will definitely have time for them. We just want to make sure you have time to see the demo as well.
Back to everybody soon.
All right. And as we're heading to the studio, Carmen, what is to my left here? Because this is a pretty awesome display we've gotten. It's pretty unique as well.
Yeah, so this triple bench was built for shohin bonsai, which are trees that are 8 inches or less. We have one here on the bottom left. This is the cotoneaster. We plan to get more shohin bonsai, but what is on display mostly now are what we call kusamono. These are accents that we can display with bonsai. They can also be displayed separately, as you would display bonsai with a scroll and a stand. These, we've created all of them here at the gardens using mostly native plants, and with the intention of displaying them on empty benches throughout the year as trees are being worked on or taking a rest. And for this event, this is a great time of year to see them. There's tons of new growth, some flowers. And then up on the top right corner, this is an outsider, or an outlier, I should say. It's not a shohin. This is an azalea. This is one that I picked out. I had the opportunity to go to Japan on one of these buying trips with a couple bonsai professionals. And I was able to pick this one out from a nursery in Japan and have it brought here. And the flowers are just lovely.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Fantastic. All right, we're heading into what we consider our Bonsai Studio here. It's nice and cool in here, and you'll be able to see and hear Carmen, I think, a little bit better in here as well. I just want to pan behind her really quickly to show you some of our other collection. If we have some time, we might go in there at the end, but in any case, you'll get to see it as a backdrop this morning. All right, and before we get started with the demo, I was really intrigued this morning as Carmen was setting up. So just to show you, some of you on the call might be intrigued by this kind of stuff too. All of the tools and kind of things that it takes to maintain these trees. I'm not sure we're going to go through every single one of them, but just to kind of show you what we've got set up here. And as Carmen's going through what she's doing, she might talk about some of them.
Yeah, I would just like to point out the coffee is definitely the most important tool for bonsai. Yeah, we've got a lot of really interesting tools that are used specifically for bonsai, and there are others that are used even just specifically for azaleas. What I have here is really raw stock. You can see it hasn't been styled yet. It's really still growing. It's not in a bonsai pot. We're going to do our demo on this in just a little bit, but go over a couple of the tools. Mostly you need your trusty scissors. These are a bonsai artist #1 friend. These ones are small, which I prefer. There's also some larger ones for bigger trees. These are my root shears. So these I generally use for repotting and trimming roots, which is why I let them get kind of dirty and dull. Generally cleaner. Pruners, wire cutters, critical for wiring, or not pruners, these are pliers, I'm sorry. Pliers and wire cutters, critical for wiring and taking wire off trees, which is how we style them and get the bends. You can see we have actually some wire on this tree, which I'll bend for you later. As far as azaleas go, Specific azalea tools are some of these brushes. These are used to polish the trunks. So the azaleas are susceptible to one particular pest called lacewing. It's a little bug that gets on the bottoms of the leaves, and they tend to lay their eggs in the bark of an azalea. So this is twofold. We brush the bark yearly, or we use, this is another tool you can use for removing azalea bark. This is like a mini power washer. It's actually a dry cleaning tool for stain removal, but it's super handy for cleaning large trunks quickly. But you want to remove that outer layer of bark while still leaving, you know, some skin on the tree. You don't want to go all the way to the cambium, but you brush that to prevent hiding places for the azalea lacewing bug. And also it lightens the trunk from gray to more of a tan, as you saw out there, which is generally preferred for show of azalea.
Fantastic. And Carmen, I know obviously being the volunteer coordinator, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I know it's not just you that takes care of all of these trees. So is it an army of volunteers, staff? Who helps you with this maintenance throughout the year when it's not COVID crisis closures?
Sure. Yeah, so generally we have staff and volunteers who help. I generally have a summer intern who comes in May, teach watering, pruning, basic bonsai care, and they're able to help me with all of the work. We also have a very dedicated group of volunteers from the Ann Arbor Bonsai Society who come out here weekly, sometimes more if we have a special event or if trees need extra care. Yeah, and this year we haven't been able to utilize those resources. And I will say I definitely miss my volunteers this year. When we get more to the demo, you'll see that part of azalea care is to remove all of the blooms after they've blossomed. And there's often over 1,000 blooms on each tree, sometimes multiple thousands of blooms. And so that will be much more difficult with just one person.
Sure, yeah.
So I may pull in some of our other staff.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It does take an army of folks to take care of this collection. And we're happy we have Carmen kind of taking the lead right now through everything. So
yeah, we have over 70 trees. That does include the azaleas. So it's definitely a lot of work. It requires many people.
for sure. All right, Carmen, if we want to get into the demo now, it's about 10:30. And
Okay.
so, yeah, we've got plenty of time for the demo and just to kind of go through things.
Great. So this is some raw stock that we have that one of our technicians is working to style into a bonsai. And so I'm just going to go over a few things, just general kind of care for this time of year. The things I'm going to be doing on this tree are often translated to the mature trees as well. There's occasionally some different techniques which we can talk about. So first of all, you'll notice this one is flowering. Here is a flower that's still on the tree.
We have a flower.
This one, the petals have fallen off, but you can still see the ovary of the flower remains. So if we leave this on, this is going to form a seed, which is a huge energy suck on the tree, especially when we're trying to develop branches. So I'm distracted. There's a nest of house finches up there, and Mama just came back to feed the babies. So you'll hear them.
They're very loud. They are part of our audience this morning. So
it's been fun to watch them throughout the spring. So with every single place on an azalea where there has been a flower, we go in with our hands or with a small scissor and take it off. So as you will see in azalea photos later this week, there's thousands of these on every tree. So this is our first step. We remove the ovary from the branch. And so often we'll do it when the flowers start to fade. So you can see this one is starting to get a little bit brown, a little bit crushed. So even at this stage, sometimes just to make our lives easier, we do all the flower removal at once. So we'll take that off.
And how long would you say, Carmen, it takes on a tree this size, if it was, I guess, had more blooms on it? How long would that take to remove them?
On this size, this would only be, I'm a terrible judge of how long it takes to do anything. I would say probably an hour or two just for flowers. Some of those trees out there can take at least half a day. When you add in the springtime pruning, it can be a full day or longer.
So lots of work, lots of work. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm looking at least a week of work just on azaleas. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that's flower removal. Here you can see that azaleas will often have two sets of buds, a set that blooms first, and then there's a second set that will bloom a little bit later. That also is to protect the reproduction of the plant in case there's like a heavy frost that kills that first round of buds. They still have some buds protected that can come out later. So this one still has a bud. I'm gonna let that go ahead and bloom. All right, so there's one technique I want to talk about that's called the fishtail technique. And so once you have all of your flowers removed, this is general maintenance on all azaleas for this time of year. And that's to control your shoots. So you can see on this one, this particular bud has 4 separate shoots coming out of one location. Oftentimes azaleas will have 5. And our goal is to reduce it down to 2 shoots, and then each shoot has 2 leaves. So that's why we call it fishtail. And that also not only allows the tree to extend where we want it, but oh my gosh, it makes wiring much easier because you're able to very clearly see where you're going with your wire and then control the growth of the tree. So take a look at this one. Now I'm gonna spin around real quick and trim it.
Again, we're doing our best this morning to zoom in and get as close, but not too close. So hopefully you all were able to see that a bit.
I have a drawing over on the whiteboard as well, which I'll go over to in a little bit. So this shoot wasn't particularly strong, so it's hard to see, but had this leaf been a little bit bigger, it would be much clearer. So I've removed the bud, taken off the 2 other shoots, and taken the remaining shoots down and back to 2 leaves. So this is a process to do over the whole tree. This tree hasn't quite put out all of its spring growth yet, so this will likely be finished later in the week. Should we go over to the whiteboard real quick?
Yeah.
To clarify?
That way we can show you again a little bit more about what we were talking through.
Shameless plug. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Matthaei Nichols.
We promise that's where all the content will be when these all go in bloom. We'll also have some content right after this too. So
Satsuki, 5th month of the Chinese lunar calendar. Just refresh there. So typically, this is if you're looking directly at the end of the shoot, this is where the flower would be, and you have those 5 shoots coming out of the bud. So the fishtail technique is to take it down, the 2 buds. Generally, you want something that's going down and out. You wouldn't really want to keep these 2 going straight up. You could wire them down, but azaleas are very brittle and difficult to wire. So pick the ones that are already going the direction you want. So then you end up with something that looks more like this. Here's where those other 3 shoots were. You still have your 2 shoots. And here you'll cut here and here. And this is what you will end up with. Then you can run, your wire down here to position these if you need to. Cool.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
And we will certainly have time once she's finished with the demo to ask any questions about the demo. And of course, we can reference back to the whiteboard or the plant, or excuse me, the tree or anything like that. All right, so what's next?
Yeah, so again, these techniques we generally do over the entire tree. I'm just going to kind of pick a few here and there to show you what you would do. Here you can see this is really very fluffy. You can't really see any definition of where all of the buds are. Something that you can do here is remove all of the old leaves. So always support your stem. These are super brittle and easy to break. It takes a little while to learn how far you can go with them. But by removing all of last year's leaves, it allows more energy to go to your new shoots and lets you see where you're going to be wiring, etc. And then anything super little and weak, you just pull off. Here's something that's really not super strong. Something to just twist them off. Don't generally need a scissor for those. You can see that we've got some wire on this tree. We use aluminum on azaleas. There's two kinds of bonsai wire, aluminum and copper. Aluminum is softer, and azaleas are very thin-skinned, and since they grow very quickly, they can sometimes scar. There's a wire scar here from where there was a wire that wasn't removed soon enough. The tree will grow out of this, but we're trying to avoid that. So we've got some heavy aluminum on right now. As soon as the tree sets and we see the wire starting to see the branch kind of swell around the wires, then we'll take it off. We have some different vigor on this plant. This is super strong. Over here is pretty weak. This is a good time of year to remove weak growth. Also, we don't really have any branches coming out here, so if we want to keep this branch, we're going to want more branches coming from here. This is a reasonable time of year. You often can do this in March before the tree really starts growing. Where's my scissors? There they are. But you can cut off weak growth. This is going to stimulate all of the dormant buds that live back here to pop out. You can see right here where a dormant bud has popped out, super strong, ready to grow. That's what we're hoping we'll get along here. This had been a bud, let's see, 2 years ago. This one popped out. And actually, this is a bad spot for a new branch. It's right at the base of another branch. It'll make this part swell. We don't really know what to do with it here. So this is, oh, this one's strong enough. I have to use a scissor. Oh, wait, it just popped off. Hooray. So now we have a really clear junction where all these branches come together. The wire on this tree, like I mentioned, we use wire to move branches to where we want them to go. I can actually see this branch eventually coming back here. And then just to show you what wire does on a tree, this is not necessarily where this branch is going to go. So all you bonsai fanatics out there, don't, I know it's not a good place. But you can bend a branch to exactly where you want it to go. And so I just did a straight down bend, but you can also bend forwards and backwards and get a full on squiggly mess if you'd like. And again, this is pretty heavy wire. You can see it's at least as thick as the branch, which is what you want. Aluminum does not hold as well as copper. And I'll go ahead and throw some wire on this branch just so, just to demonstrate what that would look like. How are we doing on time?
Pretty good.
Pretty good? Okay.
Joe, just to call it out to you real quick, as Carmen's getting that wire ready, do we have any specific questions to highlight right now about the demo or any of the techniques that Carmen is doing that we can answer right now?
Not really. There's a question about fertilizing, but not specific to the demo so far.
Okay, I'll touch on fertilizing in just a sec.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
So there's different gauges of wire, different sizes to use. This is, it's probably hard to tell, I can show. This is a lighter wire. This is your really heavy duty step. So we're gonna use this on branches this size. It's almost the same diameter as the branch. So when you're wiring, typically, until you can really eyeball it, you can kind of measure what you're gonna do.
So you just measured the branch then, essentially?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then usually cut 10% more. Better to have more than
Sure,
fall
yeah.
short. Yeah, so brace it. And then you wrap at
I'm gonna try and get the audience to see it from above. So give me a second, audience.
You wrap at about 45-degree angle. Actually, on azaleas, 45 is a little bit tight for azaleas. If you have a little bit wider angle on your wiring, you can see right here, this is about a 60-degree angle. This is really really good. A 45 won't hold as well. So you go around the buds, and then you end with a little bit of a tag. So you keep your wire flat and give yourself a 1/4 of an inch. That way when you go to remove it, you can really easily grab it with fingers or pliers and unwrap. So here, again, I've wrapped this under the branch. That provides a really solid anchor. So when I move this branch, this one won't also move.
Breaking in here with a question about the wire, how long do those wires have to stay on to produce the effect that they're intended to produce?
Sure. So as with most things in bonsai, the answer for that is it depends. For an azalea, usually we would check wires at least once or twice throughout the summer. And on something this strong and vigorous and young, we might remove it by the fall, because there's a whole other slew of fall work that you do. And for a deciduous tree, usually it is only about 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes 8 if your tree's really slow in pushing. But as soon as these branches lignify, which is when the fellows kind of harden up, you can take the wire off. Something like a conifer, a pine, or a juniper, I've seen wire on for 10 years and it hasn't scarred. Those are a little bit, they don't stay as well or as quickly as a deciduous tree or something like an azalea. But with deciduous, when you're using aluminum, usually it's pretty quick. In Japan, I've seen aluminum wires come in silver, which is super useful. You don't tend to lose silver in a really dense tree as easily as you can lose this. Here it's super easy to see. So now that we have wires on, we can position. So this bud is going to come out this way. And we do, this is a good angle for this branch. And, we can just give it a little bit of movement there. And then up here, this is going a little bit straight up and bring it down. And this bud will go out. We don't necessarily want this bud to also go out. So we can put a little bit of a bend there so that they're going in a little bit of a different direction. You can see. So I'm not going to wire this whole branch out. I don't think we've got time for it, but that may be something I could do later and post on Facebook or our website. All right, so we've covered pruning, wiring, major cutbacks. Often when you make a cutback, these guys are small cuts. If you have a bigger cut, if I was cutting something here, you'd want to use a cut paste just to prevent disease from getting in. There's a number of specific cut pastes for bonsai. Oh, that was brittle. It'll be fine. If you break a bud, just cut it off. You're likely to get a bud pop out from here. Azaleas are super brittle. Yeah, there's cut paste specific for bonsai. Some even preferred for azaleas over something like conifer. Fertilizing. Let's touch on that a little bit. So there's, again, with anything in bonsai, it depends on your fertilizer. I'll talk specifically about azaleas here. If that's what we're focusing on. These guys are fairly heavy feeders, especially if you really want to grow your tree. Fertilize more maybe than you would something else, especially since they're an early spring grower. So we feed these starting in the spring. We start to see the active growth. And we continue all the way through bloom. Once they start blooming, we tend to lay off for a couple of weeks. If you fertilize too much when they are blooming, you'll see some deformities within the flower. As soon as we take flowers off, we're right back at it with fertilizing. You can use, we generally stick to liquid fertilizers, but you can use granule or like bone meal and fish meal mixed together in a tea bag and lay down the surface. Even with the granules, we put it in a little plastic basket and stick it in. That way, every time you water, the tree is getting a really low level of fertilizer. The reason we don't often use baskets and tea bags here is because we have raccoons. And the one time that I did put tea bags on every single tree, the raccoons came through and took them all off. So we stick to a relatively low concentration single-digit fertilizers. So if you're looking at a fertilizer, the analysis is of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Something like Miracle Grow is 20-20-20. That's a high strength fertilizer. We tend to stick with something like fish emulsion, which is in single digits, like 5 cc's, sometimes 7. Can't remember what our fish emulsion is. Azaleas also are an acid-loving plants like rhododendrons, so we'll often hit them with something that's a little bit higher acid fertilizer, just to keep our pH low. It allows them to do better.
Great. Well, Carmen, I think we'll put a pause on the demo for a second, and we're about 10:45 or so. So, Joe, what kind of questions do we have that we can engage with the audience about? We're ready to do a back-to-back question block, or Carmen's ready, I guess I should say.
Ready.
Okay, alrighty. Could you plant a Satsuki right in the ground in your garden and sort of treat it like a bonsai and prune it, or does it need to be confined to a pot with all the techniques that you've just described?
That's a good question.
I mean, sorry, Carmen, I've seen like Japanese maples, for example.
Right.
People have done that. Anyway.
I have, I'm not familiar of growing azaleas in the ground, this type of azalea in the ground as a landscape plant. I don't know, I imagine it would be cold hardy in parts of the country. I don't know about Michigan. And plants within this family, it's the Ericaceae family with rhododendrons and our azaleas here. They prefer acid soil, and our soil here in Michigan is pretty basic, usually with a really high pH of like 8 or 9, which they don't really love. So well, there's a couple things you could do. If you did want to plant one in the ground, you could change the soil. You could try to keep your soil more acid by adding soil amendments. If you're, and you probably would want to burlap it in the winter for protection. Keep it up near the house where it's a little warmer. You could technically grow an azalea in the ground for bonsai as well, but for that, so bonsai soil is different from regular garden soil. They're usually planted in a volcanic mix of volcanic clays that do come from Japan. Azaleas are a little bit different. They don't even go in regular bonsai soil. They go in what's called Konuma, which is a very specific type of clay particle, super lightweight, holds a lot of water, allows for really fine root growth. And this actually comes from a region in Japan called Konuma, after the soil. So if you were going to grow something like an azalea for bonsai and you wanted to beef up the trunk, you would probably want to make a garden bed of Konuma in which to grow it, or slightly easier, more portable, build a box out of cedar, or I've seen colanders used. Fill that up with your Konuma soil, keep your tree in there to really ease it up. But as far as the landscape plants, I've not seen them in Michigan, at least.
All right.
Okay, thank you. We do have, no, that's great. We do have a few more questions that I think we should get to. Here's one that's somewhat technical. It's from Gregory. With the finely tangled roots, I find it difficult to do root pruning with repotting. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes. So, yeah, azalea roots are a whole thing. They're like really fine hair. Very different from other trees. So when we repot, this is usually done every 3 to 5-ish years with azaleas. We remove them from the pot. I don't know if this one hasn't been planted, but we take them out of the pot, and then we use a couple different tools. Have them here, handy dandy. This is a root hook for detangling, a rake, and chopstick, which is your best friend in bonsai. Good thing they're super cheap and biodegradable. So with azaleas, they are generally not bare rooted unless you are importing or exporting them. So usually what you can do is just kind of break off 1/4 of an inch on the top. And then for your sides, I'll often use root scissors, so you can kind of loosen things up with a rake or a root hook. It's going to be a tangly mess, and then cut off maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch on the bottom, another 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And really you want to leave that core of fine roots intact. So really you're just kind of shaving off the sides. I've seen folks use bread knives. I prefer more traditional methods of chopsticks and root hooks because you can be more delicate. But I've seen slabs of root being cut like meatloaf. It's fascinating. Then also, azaleas are really susceptible to root rot. So when you're repotting, be sure when you're doing the underside, you hollow it out just a little bit, pack some soil in there to be sure that that cavity is filled. And then when you tip it back over on the pot, be sure there's a little mound of soil and really settle it in so that there's no air pockets, because that does tend to lead to root rot. Hopefully
Okay,
that.
great. Oh, okay, thank you. One more somewhat technical, at least it seems to me. From Victor, when it comes to style, some azaleas are grown with pads and others with rows. What is your opinion? Can you also explain that to us a little bit?
Some are grown with pads and some are grown with what?
Some are grown with pads and some with rows. What is your opinion?
Rows?
Some azaleas are grown with pads and others with rows. Pad, P-A-D-S, and others with rows. So, not sure.
A row of things, yes?
Yeah, I think I might have to ask Victor what he means.
Sure. I will say that I'm not super clear about what a row would be. But yeah, traditionally they're grown with pads. So here, again, it's kind of that layering so that you have some of that negative space between the canopy. You don't just want a helmet. You want that helmet to kind of, well, not the helmet. You want the canopy to kind of come in asymmetrically but balanced to create these kind of pads. Let's go to the board here.
To the whiteboard.
Social distancing. Okay. So
There's a couple more questions. I think are good.
Okay, well, fantastic.
I'm gonna show pads real quick.
She's on a roll here, so we're gonna.
Sorry, give me 1 sec. I'll draw quick. So say you have your trunk here. Here's your pot. Terrible pot. Yeah, then you'll have your pads. So like, say that's your canopy. Something kind of like this. Yeah, so the pads are kind of convex, concave, convex. So you have sloping pads, and this allows for sunlight to kind of come in evenly, give you kind of a nice soft line. Cool.
Okay, thank you. And we're happy again to follow up. We have everybody's emails and all of that. So if we didn't, answer the question, or you want to clarify anything, or we don't get to your question, we should be able to follow up in the next few weeks.
I love talking and answering questions.
Okay, here's a question, and it's a sort of a bigger picture question. Can you, Carmen, talk a little bit about expanding the bonsai display area in the conservatory for when we're able to reopen?
Yes. Yeah, so we've had an influx of trees, and we'll be accepting a large private collection as well, which will more than double what we have here. We're looking for expanded display space. So last year we added, I think it was 8 new benches in the bonsai garden for our trees. And then if you've been here, you're familiar with our conservatory, where we had a single bench that was that allowed us to display 2 to 4 trees at a time. We're redoing the temperate house of the conservatory, and we've removed that bench. The space now up behind our waterfall, there's a small path there. We've installed 7 new benches and some new ground planting, and that will serve as additional display space, particularly for the trees such as our tropicals, which do grow year-round, and we generally have them stored in our greenhouse. Now they can be all on display for the entire winter, even into the summer when there's not space out here. They can be on display in our conservatory for folks to enjoy year-round. since our bonsai garden is seasonal, we open in May and close in November. When we're open, when there's not a pandemic.
All right, Joe, we're happy to take
Okay,
about
thanks.
2 more questions.
Okay.
And then we want to make
Okay,
sure
first-
folks can get to their morning.
Right. Right. An easy one. Do you repot azaleas before bloom flowering or after flowering?
Well, it depends.
It depends.
So
Yeah.
That's our theme. It depends.
both. It's a both and rather than either or. So you should, I would say, unless you have a good reason not to, you should repot your azalea before it blooms. If you want to allow that azalea to have more energy that year, you can remove the buds so that it doesn't spend the energy blooming. But spring is typically the best time to do it. The trees are just coming out of winter dormancy; they're ready to grow. So it's a really good time to do root work. You can do these a little bit before your other trees. So we usually start here in February or March with our azaleas. That way we're done by the time it's time to move into deciduous repotting in April. If you have to, you can repot after bloom, but remember that you're in the middle of summer, you're in June, July, it's very hot. Azaleas like heat, but they like humidity as well. So the tree's already stressed from heat, and it did just spend a ton of energy blooming. If you have an emergency repot, as we call them, you can do it, but be sure that after you do that, you move into the shade for at least a few days, maybe a week, and that you keep close eye on the water. In Japan, usually they'll do it before bloom. More folks than here in the US will do it after bloom, but June is their monsoon season, so they have rain, storms, and cooler, wetter weather, which is less stressful for the tree. So, short answer, before blooming. Long answer, either one.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it up to you all whether you want to answer one more question or whether you want to wrap it up.
I think we want one more. What is
Yeah,
our
let's do it.
closing question? We could go
Nothing to-
all day, but
Oh, yeah.
you know.
It has nothing to do with technique, but it's about what you have learned. What are some of the things, or what is the thing that you really think of that you've learned from being the bonsai collection specialist at Matthaei Nichols?
Oh my, I've learned a lot of things. Probably the biggest thing would be that you won't ever know everything. As we mentioned at the very beginning of this, I have worked with Michael Hagedorn, who's a professional bonsai artist who's been doing this for over 30 years, and he still doesn't know everything. So I've been doing this for about 10 years, and yeah, I'm learning new things, if not daily, then monthly, probably. There's always something new, and everybody has their own techniques or tricks on how to do something. So really being able and willing to have that kind of humbleness to be like, oh, well, I have been doing that wrong for 6 years, and relearn something, the correct way to do it or a different way to do it. That's probably the biggest thing that I've learned outside of a billion bonsai techniques.
Okay, thank you. That's a great answer. Thank you, Carmen.
Sure thing.
All right, with that positive note, we're going to end the webinar this morning. I want to, of course, thank Carmen for everything and her expertise. This has been a learning experience for me and Carmen and I, as far as the tech side of things go. So thank you all on this webinar for obviously just kind of giving us your attention this morning and being interested, but also just bearing with us as we were social distancing and dealing with birds and wind and all the good things here at the gardens. I want to just close with, of course, Carmen saying, see you later.
so long. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This was super fun. I hope to do more of this throughout the season and bring everybody to the garden collection while we're all staying safe at home.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to take you to the back collection here as we close. Again, we didn't have time to show you all this, but as Carmen said, we do anticipate, as we are closed to the public here, that we will potentially be able to do and provide more virtual events like this as we have to remain closed for potentially parts of the summer. So you can see the trees right here in the back, and hopefully we can show you this collection and talk with you a little bit more later this summer. We will be reaching out to everybody with a survey as well so that we can get better at doing these things and to just hear how it went from your perspective. So stay tuned for that. And as we mentioned, Facebook, website, all that good stuff, we'll be following up with you throughout the week about those bonsai actually in bloom. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.